The episode opens with a violent fight between Hannibal Lecter and Jack Crawford in Hannibal's kitchen. Jack manages to stab Hannibal in the leg, but Hannibal gains the upper hand, stabbing Jack through the hand and then plunging a piece of broken glass into his neck. As Jack collapses into the pantry, Hannibal closes the door on him. The story then flashes back 12 weeks. Hannibal serves dinner to Jack. Jack is under investigation by Cade Purnell of the OIG for his role in Will's breakdown, and they discuss their mutual guilt over Will Graham's institutionalization. Meanwhile, at the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, Will Graham is a patient under the care of Dr. Frederick Chilton. During a therapy session with Alana, Will tries to access his lost memories through hypnosis. He has a disturbing vision and wakes up violently, regurgitating a human ear. Beverly Katz, now taking on Will's role at crime scenes, investigates a new case where multiple bodies have been found preserved in a river. The FBI lab team, consisting of Beverly, Jimmy Price, and Brian Zeller, discover the bodies were drugged with heroin, coated in silicone and resin, and stitched together. Hannibal meets with his own psychiatrist, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier, and discusses his fascination with Will and his decision to consult on the new case in Will's stead. Bedelia questions his motives and suggests he is obsessed with Will. Beverly secretly visits Will, bringing him case files. He quickly realizes the killer is assembling a color palette of human skin tones and directs the FBI to search for a silo. His theory proves correct, and the team discovers a massive, gruesome mural of a human eye made from dozens of bodies inside a grain silo. The killer is found dead in the center, having become part of his own artwork. The episode's opening fight scene is revealed to be a flash-forward. In the present, Hannibal visits Will in the hospital. Will tells Hannibal that his memory is returning and that he now has clarity. He calmly states that he knows what Hannibal did and that when he fully remembers, there will be a reckoning. The episode ends with Hannibal listening to Will's declaration, his expression unreadable. The episode opens with a man covered in a clear resin-like substance breaking out of a large silo. Inside, numerous other bodies are similarly preserved and arranged in a circular mural. The man escapes into a nearby cornfield where he is hunted and shot by Will Graham. Wounded, the man falls from a cliff into a river below. At the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier informs Hannibal Lecter that she can no longer be his psychiatrist, stating that she finds him dangerous and has begun to question his actions regarding Will Graham. She warns Hannibal to stay away from her home. Hannibal and Beverly Katz visit Will in his cell. A disoriented Will asks for Hannibal's help, admitting he no longer knows who he is. Beverly, working on her own, tells Will she believes he is innocent and wants to find the truth. The FBI team, including Hannibal, examines the body of the man from the silo, identified as Roland Umber. They determine he was part of a larger collection and was torn free. Beverly observes that the various victims have different skin tones, leading her to theorize the killer is creating a color palette. She later admits to Jack Crawford that she secretly sought Will's help, and he deduced the killer was constructing a human mural at a farm. Following this insight, the FBI locates the farm and discovers the silo filled with bodies. The killer is found at the center of the mural, having stitched himself into his own creation to complete the eye of his design. Back at the FBI, Jack faces an internal investigation over his handling of the Will Graham case. Cade Purnell, from the Office of the Inspector General, visits Will and tells him the official narrative is that he was a murderer before the FBI employed him. Dr. Alana Bloom also visits Will, reaffirming her belief in him, and they share an intimate moment through the bars of his cell. The episode concludes with Hannibal, dressed in his plastic kill suit, entering Dr. du Maurier's house. When Jack later arrives to question her, he finds the house empty, with her purse left behind. The episode begins with a recap of Will Graham's arrest and the mounting evidence against him, culminating in his decision to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. In his cell, Will experiences a vivid seizure, hallucinating his own execution in an electric chair. Later, as both men prepare for the trial, the scene splits to show them dressing Will into a prison jumpsuit and Hannibal into an impeccable suit. In court, the prosecution opens its case, detailing the murders attributed to Will and presenting graphic photos of the victims. During a recess, FBI Executive Cade Purnell warns Jack Crawford not to show any doubt in Will's guilt during his testimony. Meanwhile, the forensics team, including Beverly Katz, is called to a new crime scene. The courthouse bailiff has been murdered and staged in a manner that mimics the crimes Will is accused of, including having his ear cut off. The trial continues with testimony from Freddie Lowndes, who claims Abigail Hobbs feared Will. Will's lawyer, Leonard Brower, discredits her by highlighting her history of libel lawsuits. Dr. Frederick Chilton then takes the stand for the prosecution, portraying Will as a manipulative psychopath. Hannibal visits Will at the asylum and provides him with the forensic report on the bailiff's murder. Will notices inconsistencies between this murder and the ones he allegedly committed, realizing it is the work of a copycat. The killer's actions create an opportunity for Will as they introduce reasonable doubt. This new development complicates matters for Alana Bloom, who was scheduled to testify about Will's instability, but now finds her professional opinion challenged by the possibility of a copycat. The case takes another dramatic turn when the judge presiding over the trial is found murdered in his chambers, grotesquely displayed as a figure of justice with his heart and brain balanced on scales. With the judge dead, a mistrial is declared. Jack's testimony, in which he admits to pushing Will too hard, further weakens the prosecution's case. After the mistrial is announced, Will's lawyer receives an envelope containing a fishing lure made from human remains, another calling card of the copycat. In the lab, the forensics team discovers that the bailiff had checked Abigail Hobbs's ear out of the evidence room before his death, and that the knife used on him was different from the one used on Abigail. This confirms that someone else is recreating the murders. Following this lead, Jack Crawford raids the bailiff's home, which explodes upon entry. Inside, they find the bailiff's charred body, mutilated and staged. The team confirms he was killed before being mutilated. In his cell, Will has a vision of himself committing this murder, cutting off his own ear to plant as evidence. Holding the crime scene photos given to him by Hannibal, Will looks at the image of the mutilated bailiff and declares, "This is my design." In a dream, Will Graham is fly fishing with a vision of Abigail Hobbs. He teaches her how to tie a blood knot and tells her he is fishing for the one who caught you. The dream ends, and Will awakens in his cell at the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. Beverly Katz visits him, revealing that the muralist killer, James Gray, was found dead and stitched into his own mural. Will insists another killer was involved and urges her to look for a hidden clue on the body, suggesting Dr. Hannibal Lecter is the true culprit. At a new crime scene, Jack Crawford, Brian Zeller, and Jimmy Price find a man's corpse covered in honeycomb and live bees. They discover the victim was lobotomized before being placed in the field. Meanwhile, Dr. Frederick Chilton informs Will that he is a popular topic in psychiatric circles and administers a narcoanalytic interview with sodium amytal. Under the influence of the drug, Will has a seizure and realizes Hannibal used a strobe during their therapy sessions to induce his seizures and memory loss. Dr. Hannibal Lecter has a session with Jack's terminally ill wife, Bella, who reveals she has overdosed on her morphine. As she loses consciousness, Hannibal prepares an overdose reversal drug but hesitates. When Bella begins to convulse, he administers the injection, saving her life. He later explains his actions to Jack at the hospital. Beverly consults with Hannibal at the FBI lab about the muralist's body. Together, they discover that the victim's leg was amputated and then reattached with a second, hidden set of stitches. Inside the leg, they find the missing kidney of a previous victim, confirming Will's theory of a copycat killer who was also the Chesapeake Ripper. Beverly asks Hannibal what he thinks the Ripper does with the organs he takes, and Hannibal calmly replies, he eats them. The investigation into the bee man leads the FBI to Catherine Pims, an acupuncturist who treated both bee-covered victims. She confesses to having quieted their minds with lobotomies to ease their suffering before leaving them to die. Following Will's advice to search for evidence against Hannibal, Beverly breaks into Lecter's home. She finds a human organ in his freezer and proceeds to the basement to investigate further. There, she discovers a makeshift dungeon containing hair and blood evidence. As she collects a sample, Hannibal appears behind her. She draws her weapon and fires as he lunges, and the scene cuts to black. The episode opens with a stark contrast between Hannibal Lecter meticulously preparing a gourmet breakfast of oysters and scrambled eggs, and Will Graham receiving a Spartan meal on a tray in his cell. At Hannibal's home, Jack Crawford joins him for the elaborate meal. Jack reveals his wife Bella attempted to overdose on morphine to escape her terminal cancer, but Hannibal intervened and saved her. Jack thanks Hannibal, who explains that as a doctor he had no choice, though as a friend to Jack he was conflicted. Following an anonymous tip. Freddie Lowndes investigates an abandoned observatory. Inside, she discovers a gruesome scene and photographs it before calling the police. Jack Crawford arrives and finds the dismembered body of FBI forensic specialist Beverly Katz, frozen and displayed in vertical slices between glass panes. At the FBI lab, Brian Zeller and Jimmy Price are distraught as they examine Beverly's remains. They discover that her kidneys have been removed and replaced with the kidneys of James Gray, the mural killer, confirming that the same person murdered them both. Jack and Alana Bloom visit Will in the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane to deliver the news of Beverly's death. Will is overcome with grief and rage, collapsing in his cell. He later experiences a vivid mental reconstruction of the murder, envisioning Beverly entering Hannibal's home, discovering his basement of horrors, and being killed by him. The vision culminates in Will seeing himself as the killer, strangling Beverly before transforming into the horned Wendigo creature that haunts him. Seeking a way to act from behind bars, Will requests a meeting with Freddie Lowndes. He offers her an exclusive story in exchange for using her Tattlecrime website to open a line of communication with the person who killed the bailiff and the judge during his trial, whom Will believes is his admirer. Freddie agrees, and Hannibal later reads her published article. Meanwhile, Dr. Frederick Chilton transfers Abel Gideon back to the hospital, placing him in a cell near Will. Chilton and Hannibal have a tense conversation about Will's therapy, with Hannibal requesting an interview with Gideon. In the common area, Gideon taunts Will. Will asks Gideon if he knows the identity of the Chesapeake Ripper. An orderly, Matthew Brown, expresses his belief in Will's innocence and offers his help. Seizing the opportunity, Will asks the orderly to kill Hannibal Lecter. Jack and Alana go to Hannibal's office, but he is not there. They discover that his appointment calendar is empty. Jack receives a phone call tracing Hannibal's location to his home swimming pool. They rush there to find an orderly shot dead and Hannibal hanging from a rope, seemingly the victim of a staged suicide. Jack cuts him down and attempts to resuscitate him. Will, back in his cell, hallucinates a stag and envisions a water fountain dripping an ear before it turns to blood. The episode begins with Dr. Hannibal Lecter playing the harpsichord. At the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane, Jack Crawford visits Will Graham. Jack informs Will that the hospital orderly who recently tried to kill Hannibal is now believed to be the copycat killer from Will's trial. Will confesses he instigated the attack by telling the orderly that Hannibal is the true Chesapeake Ripper. He insists Hannibal is a cannibal who serves his victims at dinner parties. A disturbed Jack later visits Hannibal's home and finds a Rolodex of recipes, including heart tartare and beef roulade, which appear to be for human organs. That evening, Hannibal and Dr. Alana Bloom share a romantic dinner. He tells her he is composing music to process his near-death experience. They kiss and spend the night together. In the morning, Jack arrives to report that Abel Gideon has escaped custody after a security guard was murdered in the Ripper style. Alana appears from upstairs, establishing Hannibal's alibi for the night. The FBI investigates a new crime scene in a parking lot where the body of Councilman Sheldon Iley has been grotesquely displayed, grafted to a tree with his organs replaced by poisonous flowers. In the lab, technicians find that fishing lures left on the body contain DNA from multiple Ripper victims, including Beverly Katz and missing FBI trainee Miriam Lass. This confirms a single killer has been active all along. Using botanical and geographical evidence, the team traces the murder location to a farm in Virginia. There, Jack discovers Miriam Lass, alive, trapped in a deep well. In a separate timeline, Abel Gideon escapes the asylum after being provoked by Dr. Frederick Chilton. After being recaptured, Gideon is taken from his cell by orderlies, who are then ambushed. One orderly is killed, and Gideon is taken. Later, Hannibal hosts a dinner party. Jack makes an appearance and takes a plate of food to go for forensic analysis. After the party, as Alana sleeps, Hannibal enters Abel Gideon's hospital room disguised as a surgeon and suffocates him with a pillow. The episode concludes with Jack once again discovering Miriam Lass in the well. Following a frantic phone call from years prior, Jack Crawford and his team discover FBI trainee Miriam Lass alive in an underground cell, though she is missing an arm. In debriefing, Miriam tells Jack that the Chesapeake Ripper held her captive, amputated her arm as a message for Jack, and that she has significant memory loss about the identity of her captor. She only remembers feeling calm and waking to the smell of flowers. Jack arranges for Miriam to observe Hannibal Lecter and Alana Bloom in an interrogation room. Miriam definitively states that Hannibal is not the man who abducted her. This development leads to the exoneration and release of Will Graham from the Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane. He is met by Jack, who drives him home to his waiting dogs. Alana is also there, and while she expresses remorse for doubting him, Will remains distant, warning her that she is still wrong about Hannibal's true nature. Meanwhile, Dr. Frederick Chilton, fearing he is Hannibal's next target, visits Jack and offers to consult on the case. In the FBI lab, a partial fingerprint matching Hannibal is found on evidence from Beverly Katz's murder, and the same psychoactive drugs Chilton used on his patients are found in Miriam's system. Jack now suspects both Chilton and Hannibal. The investigation quickly turns on Chilton when two dead FBI agents and a dismembered but still living Abel Gideon are found staged in his home. Chilton, realizing he has been framed, flees to Will's house for help. Panicked, he explains that Hannibal set him up as his patsy. As Jack arrives on the property, a gunshot is heard from inside. Chilton runs out into the snowy woods, pursued by Jack. Jack shoots and wounds Chilton, who collapses. Later, Will goes to Hannibal's home and confronts him at gunpoint in his kitchen. Will declares his intention to kill him, stating it would feel righteous. Hannibal calmly questions Will's certainty, reminding him that Miriam cleared him. In a sudden shift, the scene reverts to an earlier point in their conversation. Instead of threatening him, Will asks to resume his therapy. The two men then sit opposite each other in Hannibal's office, their session beginning anew. Will, Graham, and Jack Crawford are ice fishing, where Will uses the act of catching a fish as a metaphor for luring a killer who isn't hungry, telling Jack he is a good fisherman. Later, at Hannibal Lecter's home, the three men share a meal of trout that Will caught. During the tense dinner, Will openly admits to having tried to kill Hannibal, who calmly acknowledges that Will believed him to be a killer at the time. They seem to reach a fragile truce, with Hannibal remarking on the twisted nature of their codependency. The main investigation begins when a veterinarian and his assistant discover the body of a woman, Sarah Kraber, sewn inside the carcass of a dead horse at a stable. At the FBI lab, Jack, Will, and Hannibal observe the forensics team Brian Zeller and Jimmy Price as they examine the body. They determine she was strangled before being placed inside the animal. The examination takes a bizarre turn when a live starling flies out of the woman's chest cavity upon incision. Will, reconstructing the crime, deduces that the killer was not committing a murder but rather creating a rebirth out of grief for the dead horse and its stillborn foal. He believes the killer knew both the victim and the horse and has some form of veterinary or medical knowledge. The investigation leads them to Peter Bernardone, a man with a brain injury from being kicked by a horse, who now cares for animals in a cluttered barn. Peter was a former client of a social worker named Clark Ingram. During questioning, Will's empathy allows him to connect with Peter, who reveals that Ingram was abusive. Will realizes Peter didn't kill Sarah but instead created the macabre scene as a way to process his grief. He concludes that the real killer is Ingram. Meanwhile, Margot Verger continues her therapy with Hannibal, expressing her desire to murder her abusive brother Mason. Hannibal offers her cryptic advice, suggesting that if she truly wants to kill him, she should wait until she can get away with it or find someone to do it for her. The narrative shifts back to the investigation, as Will goes to the stable alone and finds Clark Ingram there. Ingram confesses to killing Sarah. Enraged, Will attacks Ingram and releases a horse from its stall, which tramples Ingram to death. Hannibal arrives in the immediate aftermath, calmly observing the scene. He helps Will arrange the evidence to make the death look like an accident. The episode concludes with Will and Jack at a new crime scene discovered by Peter, a field of shallow graves, where Will apologizes for his past accusations against Jack, and the two men seemingly reconcile. In a surreal nightmare, Will Graham holds a horse attached by a noose to Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who is tied to a tree. After a tense conversation, Will signals the horse, which hangs Hannibal. The scene is revealed to be a dream as Will jolts awake. Later, Hannibal prepares an elaborate omelet for Jack Crawford. During their meal, Hannibal informs Jack that Will Graham is now officially his patient, and all discussions about him are protected by confidentiality. At a remote truck stop, a man named Randall Tier enters his semi-truck and fits a sharpened mechanical jaw into his mouth. The next day, Will, Jack, and Hannibal arrive at the snowy crime scene. The forensics team determines the bite marks do not match any known local predator. Will deduces that the killer is not an animal, but a man who imagines himself to be one and has constructed a suit to live out his delusion. At the FBI lab, the team identifies the bite radius as closest to that of an extinct cave bear. Hannibal reveals he once treated a teenage patient with species dysphoria who believed he was an animal. Jack and Will later visit Randall Tier, now an adult working at a natural history museum. Hannibal appears and privately speaks with Randall, revealing him to be the former patient. Hannibal encourages Randall's transformation and warns him that the FBI is closing in, instructing him to do as he says. That evening, Margot Verger arrives at Will's house, having found his address in Hannibal's appointment book. They share a drink and discover their mutual connection as Hannibal's patients, both having attempted to murder a family member. Margot asks what advice Hannibal gave Will about murder. During his next session, Will discusses his fascination with Randall Tier with Hannibal. Will confesses that his only regret about trying to kill Hannibal was that he was not effective. Hannibal encourages him to embrace his instincts. Later that night, Randall, in his beast suit, appears outside Will's house. Will releases his dogs, who give chase. After finding one of his dogs, Buster, wounded, Will pursues Randall into the woods. The confrontation moves back to the house, where the beast crashes through a window. The episode concludes with Will Graham entering Hannibal's office. He places Randall Tier's bloody, mauled body on Hannibal's desk and declares, "I'd say this makes us even." In a surreal nightmare, Will Graham is attacked in his home by a monstrous stag-like creature. He awakens to find himself in Hannibal Lecter's office, where they discuss Will's killing of Randall Tier. Hannibal notes Will's bruised knuckles, confirming he killed Tier with his bare hands. Will admits the act felt powerful. Later, at the Museum of Natural History, Jack Crawford, Hannibal, and Will examine Tier's bizarrely displayed remains, which had been mechanically fused with a cave bear skeleton. Will profiles the killer, suggesting it's a commemoration by someone who understood Tier. Meanwhile, Freddie Lowndes tells Alana Bloom she believes Will is a murderer and Hannibal is his accomplice. Alana defends them, but Freddie remains unconvinced. Freddie later goes to Will's house for an interview but instead snoops in his barn, finding what appears to be Randall Tier's animal suit and taking a meat sample from a freezer. Will confronts her, and she flees, leaving a frantic voicemail for Jack claiming Will is the killer. As she tries to escape in her car, Will appears, and her call cuts off as she screams. Jack, Hannibal, and Alana listen to the voicemail in Jack's office. Will, also present, denies that Freddie ever arrived for their interview. That night, Alana goes to Will's house, and they sleep together. Will has another nightmare, this time of the Wendigo standing over the bed he shares with Alana. The next day, Freddie's car is found burned with a charred body inside, leading the FBI to believe she is dead. At Hannibal's home for dinner, Will and Alana join him. As Hannibal serves the main course, Will comments that the meat is from a gift from a friend. Hannibal remarks that the animal tastes frightened, which he describes as acidic. When Will asks what frightened tastes like, he takes a bite and reveals the meat is long pig, implying they are eating Freddie Lowndes. Alana is horrified as Will stares intensely at a subtly smiling Hannibal. In a recurring nightmare, Will Graham sees the Wendigo transform into the antlered man stag. He later dines with Hannibal Lecter on ortolan bunting, a rare songbird. As they eat, Will confesses that he felt euphoric when he killed Freddie Lowndes. Soon after, a flaming wheelchair containing a charred body is found in a parking garage. At the FBI lab, Jack Crawford, Will, and Hannibal observe as the forensics team, Brian Zeller and Jimmy Price, examine the corpse. Dental records confirm the victim is Freddie Lowndes. They discover she was already dead before being burned, and that her psoas muscles were surgically removed. Will suggests the killer is creating a Shiva, a figure representing both destruction and creation. At Hannibal's office, Mason Verger discusses his contempt for his sister, Margot, and his obsession with producing a Verger heir. He reveals he knows Margot has been seeing Hannibal for therapy. Meanwhile, a fearful Alana Bloom visits Will at his home. He gives her his gun, telling her she should be afraid, but not of him. Alana later confronts Hannibal, admitting she no longer trusts him or Will. Hannibal responds by kissing her. At the Verger estate, Mason torments a young boy visiting the stables before confronting Margot. A subsequent surreal scene depicts Mason, dressed as a surgeon, performing a hysterectomy on an unconscious Margot. When Will learns of this, he goes to the Verger farm and attacks Mason, holding him at gunpoint over a pig pen after subduing his attendant Carlo. Instead of killing him, Will brings a captive Mason to Hannibal's home. There, Hannibal gives Mason hallucinogenic drugs. In a drug-induced state, Hannibal persuades Mason to cut off pieces of his own face and feed them to Will's dogs. Hannibal then breaks Mason's neck, leaving him paralyzed. In their next session, Will asks Hannibal what kind of father he would be. Hannibal reflects on his role as a father figure to his deceased sister, Misha, and how Abigail Hobbs reminded him of her. He tells Will he is sorry he took Abigail from him, a confession that brings tears to Will's eyes. Hannibal concludes by noting that every creative act has a destructive consequence. In a therapy session, Will Graham challenges Dr. Hannibal Lecter on his intentions, stating he is aware of the snare Hannibal has laid. Hannibal counters that Will set the trap himself by telling Mason Verger that Hannibal wanted him dead. Visibly emotional, Will admits he was merely curious what would happen. Hannibal suggests that Will also wants Mason dead and is manipulating him into the act. He instructs Will to imagine the outcome he desires, prompting a vivid mental sequence where Will frees one of Mason's men, then orchestrates Hannibal's death by dropping him into the Verger pigpen to be devoured. Later, Mason confronts Hannibal during his own therapy session, holding a knife to his throat and questioning the game of chicken being played. Meanwhile, Will visits Margot Verger in the hospital as she recovers from a forced hysterectomy, the surgery leaving a prominent scar at her brother's request. Will tells Margot that surviving Mason is its own form of revenge. At the FBI, Will informs Jack Crawford of his plan to manipulate Hannibal into attempting to murder Mason, which will finally provide Jack with the evidence and witnesses needed for an arrest. Jack cautiously agrees to the high-risk gambit. In a separate interview, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier warns Will that Hannibal's true power is persuasion, not coercion, and that he will eventually convince Will to kill someone he loves. She asserts that Hannibal's downfall will come not from a grand plan, but from his own whimsy and self-congratulation. As planned, Mason's orderlies subdue and kidnap Hannibal from his office, taking him to the Verger farm. There, they suspend him in a straitjacket over the pigpen. Mason hands Will a knife, ordering him to cut Hannibal's throat to give the pigs a taste of blood. Will cuts Hannibal free. Hannibal swiftly kills one of Mason's men and incapacitates the other. Will tells Hannibal that Mason is now his patient, leaving his fate in Hannibal's hands. Hannibal breaks Mason's neck, paralyzing him. Back at Will's house, Hannibal brings the paralyzed Mason, having given him a psychedelic drug. In a hallucinatory state, Mason is goaded by Hannibal into carving off pieces of his own face and feeding them to Will's dogs. Hannibal then cuts off Mason's nose and eats it. The next day, Jack questions Mason at his home, where he is now bedridden and under Margot's care. Mason claims his injuries were the result of an accident with his pigs. In their final session before the plan's culmination, Will and Hannibal sit in Hannibal's office. Will states that they will inevitably be caught. Hannibal reveals he knows Jack suspects them both of Freddie Lowndes' murder and that he intends to give Jack what he wants, the Chesapeake Ripper. He declares that Jack has become his friend, and he owes him the truth. Following a recap of previous events, the episode opens with Dr. Hannibal Lecter meticulously writing a dinner invitation to Jack Crawford. Jack receives and reads the note, which requests the pleasure of his company. In what will be their final session, Will Graham and Hannibal discuss their plan to ensnare Jack. Hannibal speaks poetically about the office chairs retaining the memory of all their conversations, and as they sit in silence, echoes of their past dialogue are heard. They confirm their intention to give Jack the Chesapeake Ripper, and both acknowledge that Jack will be a part of the evening's events. At the FBI, Jack informs Kate Purnell of his plan. He has sharpshooters in position and is wearing a wire, but Purnell warns him that this constitutes entrapment and is legally indefensible. In response, Jack surrenders his badge and gun, signifying he is proceeding on his own authority. He then visits his ailing wife, Bella, to say goodbye before leaving for Hannibal's home. Meanwhile, Freddie Lowndes, who is alive and in hiding, meets with Will and Alana Bloom. Will instructs her not to write about Abigail Hobbs. Alana, growing more suspicious, confronts Purnell and learns that the FBI plans to arrest both Jack and Will for conspiracy and entrapment. Realizing they have been set up, Alana calls Will to warn him, but he hangs up as FBI vehicles approach his house. Jack arrives at Hannibal's house early. The dinner invitation becomes a catalyst for a brutal, extended fight that moves from the kitchen to the dining room. Despite Jack's efforts, Hannibal gains the upper hand, severely wounding Jack with a shard of glass in the neck and locking him in the pantry to bleed out. Alana arrives next, armed, and confronts Hannibal. He disarms her by revealing he had emptied her gun previously. As Alana fumbles to reload a single bullet, she is suddenly pushed from a second-story window by a living Abigail Hobbs. Will arrives to the scene of carnage and finds the wounded Jack. He enters the kitchen to see Abigail, and his confusion turns to horror as Hannibal embraces him, whispering, "I let you know me, see me," before stabbing him in the stomach with a linoleum knife. As Will collapses, Hannibal brings Abigail to him, explains that he had saved her for this moment, and then slits her throat. Leaving Will bleeding on the floor next to Abigail, Hannibal calmly walks out of the house into the pouring rain. The final scene shows Hannibal on an airplane, sipping champagne, seated next to his former psychiatrist, Dr. Bedelia du Maurier.